Hello, I'm Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Literary Love 123, where I combine my master's in English with my passion for the horror genre to talk about the books that I read. I am coming to you today straight out of bed, no makeup, bedhead, because I'm so excited to kick off my Polar Gothic series. So I'll be right back after this quick intro to talk about what I'll be doing in this Polar Gothic series. So, first of all, I want to talk about where I first became interested in the idea of the Polar Gothic. And this took place when I was in grad school and I was writing an essay titled The Seductive Sublime Vampires in Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Christabel. So, I want to focus on the Rime of the Ancient Mariner because that is where I first encountered in my research this idea of the Polar Gothic. So I'm just going to try to condense this into as short of a thing as I can. Um, to talk about the Polar Gothic in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So, if you're familiar with Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you know that it does feature allusions or references to folklore, mariner superstitions, and travel journals. And all of these combine the supernatural with the natural in order to evoke feelings of awe and fear within the natural world, which is part of what Edmund Burke talked about in his concept of the sublime. So, the ocean setting that Coleridge chooses when he writes about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is an object of no small terror. It is one of the ruling principles of the sublime, this feeling of being so awed by the vastness of nature and the beauty of nature that it evokes feelings of fear too. So the natural world in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is inducing terror in the mariner and in his crew. One of the things that I want to talk about too, where I drew some inspiration when I was writing this essay, is an article that was titled Haunted Ice, Fearful Sounds, and the Arctic Sublime, Exploring 19th Century Polar Space, written by Catherine Bowers. And she opens this article up with a 1775 journal entry from James Cook. And in this journal entry, James Cook describes his experiences upon reaching the Arctic Circle. He recalls feeling that sublime feeling as he describes the natural world, and he creates in that space, in that travel journal itself, a polar gothic sublime, which connects to Coleridge's descriptions of ice and wind in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Like Cook, the mariner and his crew experience terror contained within nature's beauty, particularly in the uncharted territories of icy regions. And you'll see that reflected in the books and TV series and movies that I chose to, you know, interact with for this Polar Gothic series. The vastness alone in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, that vast icy ocean conjures up feelings of the sublime because it echoes Edmund Burke's claim that beauty should be light and delicate, and the great sublime ought to be solid and even massive. And you have that combination there where Coleridge kind of takes both ideas and creates his own vision for the sublime. You also have threatening ice and wind that Coleridge writes about in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. He writes, the ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled. So you have then personification manifested within the ice itself, that it is some threat, it is a terror, it is like a monster. And The icy region also evokes this sense of dread, which culminates in doomed encounters with both the albatross and the vampiric woman. The ice creates a negative space, which gives rise to supernatural beings such as the albatross, who lingers until, spoiler alert, the mariner kills it. And then the albatross spends the rest of the poem haunting that mariner. So, because of this, Coleridge's Rama, the Ancient Mariner, reflects the superstition that albatrosses contain the soul of dead sailors, and that slaying such a bird results in bad luck for the mariners. There's also a connection between the ice and the wind and the vampiric woman. Bowers writes, the albatross and the vampiric spirit both contain mystery coming from the mysterious land of mist and snow, therefore further reinforcing the supernatural potential of the solar space. And I'm just going to throw my papers all around. So, this ice world also creates this uncanny space in which your sensory experience is distorted and disrupted. And the trapped sailors then are victims of both nature and the supernatural, thereby caught in this liminal space between the real and the uncanny, and life and death. Now, I've said a lot. I think that kind of gives you an idea, probably too much, about where this idea first kind of started creating a stir in my brain. And now that I have gone over all of that, probably too much, let's talk about the books that I want to read for this vlog or this series. So I'm going to be starting with The Terror by Dan Simmons. And I don't want to say a lot about all of the books, but I will go ahead and talk about this one now because it is the first one that I'm going to be reading. And here's what it's about. The men on board the HMS Terror, part of the 1845 Franklin expedition, the first steam-powered vessels ever to search for the legendary Northwest Passage, are entering a second summer in the Arctic Circle without a thought, stranded in a nightmarish landscape of encroaching ice and darkness. Endlessly cold, they struggle to survive with poisonous rations, a dwindling coal supply, and ships buckling in the grip of crushing ice. But their real enemy is even more terrifying. There is something out there in the frigid darkness, an unseen predator stalking their ship, a monstrous terror clawing to get in. So you can see there that this does share themes with the Rama, the Ancient Mariner. We have the threat of the icy natural world, the wind, the cold, but you also have the threat of something supernatural. Also, after I finish reading The Terror, I am going to watch the AMC series based on this book. That's the only one I'm going to talk in depth about right now because it is the one that I'm going to start reading today. But the other two books that I have chosen are All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes and Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. So if you've hung around with me this long, thank you. I'm so excited about this series, and I will update you again when I have read some of The Terror. Hello, it is Friday morning around 9, and I wanted to talk about the first two chapters of The Terror by Dan Simmons. I made it through only two chapters yesterday, which is in total 29 pages out of 766. So I will be separating this series into different parts. This is part one, where I will focus on both the terror novel and then the AMC series once I finish the book. Otherwise, this video would last for hours and hours if I try to talk about all the books and all the things I'm watching. So, in this first couple of chapters, we're really getting introduced to some of the characters. I also looked up the actual historical events surrounding what happened to the ships Terror and Erebus, because we do have a historical fiction element to this. So there is a, connection to actual history here. And you have some of the same names, some of these characters are based on real people. And I'm sure there are fictional characters and there are definitely fictionalized events. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the explorations of the Northwest Passage, because that would again take a very long time, but I will link some information down in the description box below if you want to go and search that out for yourself. I did tab a few things that I felt like represented this idea of the Polar Gothic and the Sublime that I talked about in a previous clip on this video. And I like that we have this map in the beginning where you can trace the route of the ships. And we also open with a quote from Moby Dick, of course, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which was published in 1851. And I just want to talk a little bit about the first part of this quote that Dan Simmons included in this book. This elusive quality it is which causes the thought of whiteness, when divorced from more kindly associations and coupled with any object terrible in itself, to heighten that terror to the furthest bounds. So this idea of this absence, color being absent from white, right? And also the connection between the color white and purity, and how that contrasts with what is terrifying about, say, a polar bear, right? Or the white whale to Captain Ahab and Moby Dick, something that we would typically associate with purity or beauty, at least in literature, right? The color white being associated with those things. But then to have it instead equate to something terrible and horrifying. We also get the idea of this whiteout, right? Where these ships in this novel, they're stuck in the ice. All they can see around them is really just this blinding snow, this ice, but also at the same time, they're not even getting very many hours of daylight. At this point in the year where they're only getting maybe a couple of hours of daylight, but then they can't really see anything out of the skylights in the ship because all of those are covered with snow. So they're experiencing this whiteout and this terror. We also know that some have died either by exposure to the elements or this creature, this thing that's haunting them on the ice. We haven't encountered the creature like in real time, so to speak, yet, but we know that there's something that has killed men and something that is continuously stalking these crewmen. And there's also this opening passage where I've really noticed elements of the sublime, because the aurora borealis, which is beautiful, right? The northern lights, they're being described as something threatening, because it opens up with this. Captain Crozier comes up on deck to find his ship under attack by celestial ghosts. Above him, above Terror, shimmering falls of light lunge, but then quickly withdraw like the colorful arms of aggressive but ultimately uncertain specters. Ectoplasmic skeletal fingers extend toward the ship, open, prepare to grasp, and pull back. So, again, the elements of something beautiful coexisting with something terrible in the same natural phenomena. So, very much into that element of the sublime. Another thing I want to talk about is the foreshadowing or the omens that are already present in the book. Captain Crozier, talks about the sounds that the ice makes, which, by the way, it roars, growls, just like we talked about in a previous clip that Coleridge talks about in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Of course, this happens because the ice is expanding and contracting and shifting. And the captain talks about how it sounds like screams. And he compares it to the sounds of the banshee that he was told about by his grandmother. And of course, the banshee foreshadows death. It's a death omen. If you hear the banshee shrieks, someone in your house is going to die. Then there's also another part where a character gets very upset because his wife has made a Union Jack flag for the ship, but she wraps it around him at one point, and he freaks out because he says, don't you know they wrap the Union Jack around corpses, So that's like another omen that this trip is doomed. Another thing that I tabbed, let me look at that. There's also a sound coming from the dead room of the ship where they have, of course, then placed their dead. And it may be rats, but the captain also thinks it could be whatever that creature out there on the ice is trying to claw its way into the ship through the bottom. And there's also a question asked that really made me ponder, based on all of the tragedy that we know that befell explorers. And there's also commentary there about, the reasons they were exploring and the reasons they were colonizing certain areas and really taking advantage of the people there, and abusing the people, the indigenous people. So there's commentary there. But one of the questions asked is, did anyone really return alive after wintering in the Arctic regions? Even if even if their bodies survived physically, how much of their minds were left? And I know I'm just rambling on right now, but there's just so much here. Another thing that really already is freaking me out is the descriptions of the cold. So the outer temperature is 50 degrees below freezing. And so the men can't stay up on deck very long. Even wrapped in all of their gear, they have to take shorter shifts to be lookouts because they can't withstand those temperatures. You also have mentions of it being so cold. Not only would you deal with frostbite, but there was also talk about your teeth. Somebody's teeth were chattering, and it was then talked about how your teeth in that kind of cold weather could shatter and send stuff up into your brain and everything. And I was like, I can't even wrap my mind around things that cold, especially because I'm here in South Alabama. So, anyway, that's a lot to say, and I've rambled, but it is a book that I'm completely immersing myself in. Definitely going to take my time with it. And I will check back in with you later and see you in the next check in. Hello, it's Sunday afternoon around 3 o'clock, and it's been a couple of days since I checked in, but I'm still working my way through the terror. I made it to page 109. So that has gotten me chapters 3 through 10. since the last check-in, and let me just talk a little bit about what's going on. It's still a lot of the same kind of stuff happening. We get different points of view from the captains of both the ships. We get, you know, current to the events of the book timeline, and we get a couple of years prior to as they're setting out on this expedition. I had a mark for where I was in chapter 3, but I lost my place. There we go. No surprises there. All right. So this is a very slow moving book. And I'm okay with that because I knew that going into it. There were several pages that extended on with discussions between the captains and the other officers of both Erebus and Terror about what they needed to do because they found themselves stuck, on the ice. And while I felt initially, or like sometimes I was like, okay, would y'all just make up your minds about what you're going to do? I also felt like that could be intentional by Dan Simmons to put us in that headspace of these men who are on this expedition and find themselves frozen, in the ice on the Arctic. So that really kind of got me in the right kind of headspace, I think, for this. But it is just such a perfectly Gothic book in so many ways. There are a few quotes I want to share with you again. This first one that I want to share with you is a commentary on one of our characters who deals with depression or melancholia, as it was called during the time period of the 1840s, which this, book takes place in. But he parallels depression in his mind with the different decks or layers on the ship. I'm still trying to learn about this ship terminology. But anyway, I just want to read this passage to you where he does talk about his mind as a comparison to the ship or vice versa. Haunted and plagued by melancholia much of his life, knowing it as a secret weakness made worse by his 12 winters frozen in Arctic darkness as an adult, feeling it recently triggered into active agony by Sophia Krakoff's rejection. Crozier, who was one of the captains, Crozier thinks of the partially lighted and occasionally heated but livable lower deck as the sane part of himself. The brooding, mental lower world of the orlop deck is where he spends too much of his time these days, listening to the ice scream, waiting for the metal bolts and beam fastenings to explode from the cold. The bottom whole deck below, with its terrible smells and its waiting dead room, is madness. I was just blown away by that. We have other descriptions of this monster. As I've talked about before, we still don't know exactly what kind of monster it is, but there are descriptions of it as coming out from behind a pressure ridge, grabbing up one of the seamen and smashing him to splinters before any of the rest of them could even get their guns up to see or to try to kill whatever this white terror is. It is so just perfectly described. It's so atmospheric. I completely feel immersed in this Arctic world. So that's really all I can say about it right now. And I will be back when I have more to say, and I'll see you in the next check in. Hello, it is Wednesday, January 8th, about 8:15 in the morning. It's been a few days since I checked in because I've been really busy. I have been doing some final preparations on my semester course that I'll be teaching. It starts tomorrow. So you saw in the last clip that my cat Frere wanted to help me as I was kind of going over my work. Sorry about my dog barking. Hold that thought. Sorry about that. My brother-in-law has stopped by. He is doing something with my car. So I'm keeping this door open. So pardon the not so aesthetic background. But that's why my dog was barking. So, okay, today I have a neurologist appointment, which is about 45 minutes away from where I live. So, after my appointment, I'm going to go to lunch. I'll take you with me there. But now let's talk about The Terror. I am still enjoying this book. I'm going through it slowly because Dan Simmons, like, wow. He is such an amazing writer, first and foremost, but also the amount of research that he did for this book is incredible. And I just am really enjoying it. I stop, I go and read, information online about the different things that are being talked about in the book because there is so much I am learning about the Arctic and the cold and history. And I'm sorry about my dog. Let me go again. Okay. I hope everything is going to be silent now. My wonderful brother in law, who came to check on something on my car before I left to go to my appointment today, just left. So let me get back to talking about The Terror because, damn it, I am determined to do this check in before I have to leave for my appointment. So, one of the things that I really love about how Dan Simmons is writing this book is the way that he personifies the natural elements. That is something that also leans into the concepts of the Polar Gothic and the concept of the sublime. So, one example I have here is a description from one of the men on the expedition, his diary. It's and he writes, out here with nothing separating. Okay, so this is not exactly from his diary. Oops, sorry. This guy does write a diary, but this is just quote about his experience. So sorry about that. Out here with nothing separating his body from the ice except a few layers of wool and wolfskin, the groaning and movement of the ice beneath him was terrible. It was like trying to sleep on the belly of a living beast. So let me go to the next thing I tabbed. Okay, I can't really say because this might be spoiler, but we are really starting to have more encounters with the creature. Some of the men encountering the creatures themselves, and some of them seeing the aftermath of their deceased fellow members of the expedition after this creature has gotten a hold of them and ripped them up. There is also a quote that reminded me of Dante's Inferno about the inner circle of hell and how one of those layers has all of the sinners there trapped in ice, and that is like the most horrific layer of hell. So I think Dan Simmons was definitely doing this intentionally, and he writes, this chill traveled up through their trousers and other layers covering their knees, then into their bones and up through their mittens to their palms and fingers, like a silent invitation to the frozen infernal circles of the dead far below. I've tabbed a few other things, but I don't want to keep just, reading all of these passages to you. But another interesting aspect is some of the men have started to call this creature the Terror. We do know also that's the name of one of the ships. So it's so interesting to me the way that the Terror can be deconstructed because you have the Terror, the ship itself, the Terror, this creature, and the terror of being trapped in ice, of the natural world around you. And it is just, I don't know, it's just giving me all of these like, I don't know what the word is. I'm just loving it. I am just loving it. Like I said, I'm going very slowly through it. I'm only on page 153 and there are, over 700 pages in this. But I'm just taking my time with it because this truly is something that is an immersive experience. And also, I feel like I have to tell you that the book gods and the weather gods have smiled down on me. They have partnered together to make this the perfect time for me to read this book because I live in South Alabama and we don't always get really cold weather. But we have had a couple of days and we have a few more to come too of lows in the mid 20s at night and highs only getting up to the mid 40s during the day. So for us, that is very cold. And I feel like, I am truly in this, polar Gothic area, which of course, yeah, these men are experiencing temperatures like 60 below freezing. So I have no concept about that. But, getting a taste, of cold weather, southern Alabama style is good enough. And that's all I'm gonna say because I need to finish getting ready and head to my appointment. And thank you for hanging out with me during this kind of crazy check-in, but such is life. I will see you next time. And this is the vicious guard Gandalf. He's the one who was making all that noise earlier. I guess he was telling my brother-in-law, "You shall not pass." Hello, it's Sunday afternoon, about 3 o'clock. It's been a few days since I checked in. You could see in the last clip, my husband and I went to brunch on Friday after our massages, which is not something we do often, but we got one in December. And my husband was so enamored with it that he said, "We got to do this again." And so we had one, the other day, and then we have another one scheduled in February for Valentine's Day. But after that, it's gonna have to, that's gonna have to be it on massages for a while. But you're not here to talk about massages. You're here to talk about the terror. So I have made it to page 255. I am very slowly making my way through this book, still just moving slowly, not because I don't like it, but it's because I love it. And it is the kind of book that really pulls you in and makes you want to savor and digest all of the things that are happening, the terrible things. So I'm just going to kind of do that brain dump again where I look at what I've annotated and talk a bit about it. So, one of the things that I haven't talked a lot about is the couple of indigenous people who have been mentioned in this book. And one of them has since passed on, and that's not really a spoiler because as soon as they get introduced, you know that one of them passes on. But this mentality that Sir John Franklin, who is the main commander of the expedition, he just has very horrific views of the indigenous people, which, as I mentioned before, this is in the 1840s, and these are men who are exploring and trying to colonize and capitalize on resources and certain regions of the world. So it's not a surprise that he thinks this way of indigenous people, but it's still shocking to read on the page. But he just treats this injured indigenous person terribly, like yelling at him and trying to ask who he is. And of course, the indigenous people don't speak English, just like the men on the Terror. And it's companionship, Erebus, don't speak the language the indigenous people do. But Sir John, he just acts like a real dick. That's what I called him in here. I was like, so what a dick. So just so you know, there is that kind of commentary going on. And there is also an indigenous woman who ends up staying on the ship after her companion, who is the aforementioned man I just mentioned, indigenous man, dies. She stays on the ship, and Sir John continues to have these not only xenophobic thoughts about her, but also misogynistic thoughts about her. And so I was just constantly rolling my eyes at Sir John and just being like, what a piece of shit, the way that you're talking about um these people here. So I just wanted to mention that is a part of the book. And also, Sir John is very, very devout in his religion. And he, even after getting advice from the ice masters on both ships, that they did not need to continue down the path they planned to go because they were not going to be able to make it through that type of ice. Sir John decides to go on and go about this mission anyway. And when the men are feeling hesitant, he starts comparing them, to Jonah. And he starts talking about how God has sent them on this expedition, just like he sent Jonah on an expedition, and that if they refuse it, they're going against God. So, very much in that idea of manifest destiny, God has said that we need to conquer and colonize, in their terminology, these savage regions. So again, that kind of, mentality is to be expected, especially because this is based on, historical events with the obvious, supernatural element too. Then there are so many examples of body horror based on what this creature does to different characters in this story. I don't want to give details, but if you are one who gets squeamish about body horror, then that might give you pause. But if you're one, who likes body horror, this will hit you for that too. And just so much of the gothic idea here of the threat of the natural world and potentially something supernatural, the past coming back to haunt the present. Just some of the quotes that I have. Forgive me for reading this, but this is just one of the examples that I think will help you understand why this book is not only interesting historically and scientifically, but also literary. It has great literary appeal too. The men knew, Crozier knew what they knew. They knew it was the devil out there on the ice, not some overgrown Arctic bear. Captain Francis Crozier did not disagree with the man's assessment for all his pish-posh talk earlier that night over brandy with Captain Fitzjames. But he knew something that the men did not, namely that the devil trying to kill them up here in the devil's kingdom was not just the white furred thing killing and eating them one by one, but everything here. The unrelenting cold, the squeezing ice, the electrical storms, the uncanny lack of seals and whales and birds and walruses and land animals, the endless encroachment of the pack ice, the bergs that plowed their way through the solid white sea, not even leaving a single ship's length lay of open water behind them, the sudden white earthquake up eruption of pressure ridges, the dancing stars, the shoddily tin cans of food now turned to poison, the summers that did not come, the leads that did not open, everything. The monster on the ice was just another manifestation of a devil that wanted them dead. Just beautiful. Just beautiful. Let me see what else. One of the things I did want to mention too, Crozier, who himself is a captain and is one of the main leaders for this expedition, is pondering to himself the following: so why, wondered Crozier, did a nation like England, blessed to be placed by God in one of the most gentle and verdant of the two temperate bands where mankind was meant to live, keep throwing its ships and its men into the ice of the northern and southern polar extremes, where even fur-wearing savages refuse to go? And then he also asks himself why he keeps doing this. So this book is also grappling with that question of, the imperialistic England and colonization. And, you know, this captain himself is asking questions, not only, of the nation as a whole, but a question of himself, like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I'm trying to see what else I could talk about here. One other thing before I go, I do want to mention that a lot of the men on board think that the indigenous woman on the ship is some sort of witch. I don't want to give a lot of details about her because I feel that could give away some spoilers, but they think she's a witch. Obviously, that would be a common mentality. These, men would view women anyway and through a suspicious lens, but add to that she's an indigenous person, and they believe that she has somehow hexed their expedition. So some of them start leaving offerings for her, or offerings, for this creature. And so it ties there into superstition and also misogyny, as I mentioned, with the way they think of women and this woman in particular. So there is just there is so much to unpack here, which is one of the reasons why I'm not rushing through this. I'm going to leave that here for the check-in because that's a lot for me to say, even though I have more I could say. We'll leave it there, and I will see you in the next check-in. Bye for now. Hello, it's Friday, January 17th, and I apologize for the bad angle, the bad lighting, and the fact that my eyes look as bad as they do. I'm having some sort of reaction, so my eyelids are pink and swollen, but I am halfway through the terror, so I wanted to talk just a little bit about what's going on now. A lot of this, same things are happening as they're still stuck there in the ice. We've had more character deaths. We're finding out more about the creature that is stalking and killing the crew on the ships. We also have a nod to Edgar Allan Poe. There's this big section where the men through this carnival, and it is inspired by Poe's The Masque of the Red Death, because one of the sailors had read that story and had decided that for a way to celebrate New Year's Eve, even in the midst of all this horror that they're experiencing, is to, make a replica sort of the Masque of the Red Death. And if you know that story, I can also tell you, without getting too spoilery, that it has some similar consequences by the end of the party. So besides that, we are getting a lot of descriptions again of landscape and just talking about how cold it is. And then we're also finding out more about some of the individual crew. I'm still enjoying it. It's just taking me a while to get through it. But I just wanted to kind of let you know that I'm a little over halfway through and just do a quick update. I will see you in the next check-in. Bye for now. Hello, it's been a few days since I checked in. It is Monday, January 20th. It's around 3:30 in the afternoon and I just finished The Terror. So, of course, I'm going to talk about the book, but first of all, I want to talk about the weather. You may know if you follow my channel that I'm located in South Alabama near the Alabama Gulf Coast, and we don't necessarily get real winter around here, but real winter has shown up the past few days. We are going to have a low tonight of 23, which is, that's pretty low for us. But even more amazing than that is our high tomorrow. Our high temperature is going to be 28. And then tomorrow night is going to be a low of 13. And we have a 90% chance of snow tomorrow with accumulation possibly being 3 inches. Now, I know what those of you who get snow all the time are saying. You're like, oh, that's nothing. That's a big deal for those of us here in South Alabama. And I'm really excited. I feel like, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, that I feel like the weather and the book gods have smiled on me when I decided to do a Polar Gothic series to kick off January. And the weather actually fits the theme. So now that I have talked about the weather, let me talk a bit about the terror. I don't know how to talk about the end of this without giving too much away. So I will say that the brutality that takes place in the, first and like middle sections of the book, it really intensifies by the end. There are descriptions of scurvy and all of the things that happen to someone with scurvy, and it's absolutely horrifying. You also get descriptions of men who were poisoned by the food that had gone rancid. There's also potentially, intentional poisoning that's not really determined from what I could understand in the book, but there is there's a group of men who are absolutely despicable, and their leader is the worst. I don't want to give his name away in case you read it, but I have found a new character to absolutely loathe in literature. I hate this man. And this is based loosely, of course, on a true story, on the actual ill-fated Franklin expedition. So I am going to look more of that up. I didn't want to look anything up until I finished the book, but I'm going to look more of that up and see if this person I hate, this character in here, was a real person, and if he really did the things that he does in this novel. Now, this book is, I was definitely leaning on 5 stars till I got toward the end. And there is just kind of this weird thing that happens. In a way, it reminded me of certain parts of It by Stephen King when you get to the cosmic or like certain religious beliefs of indigenous people, and I appreciated that. That was interesting to get a background. Again, I don't know if this is actual because Dan Simmons is a white guy writing this. I don't know if this is actually what their spirituality is. That part was really interesting, and it had a very deep connection to the creature that had been stalking them. But then there's this other element between one of the indigenous people and one of the main characters who is, a member, very important member of the crew. And there was just some like, I don't know, some stuff I really had to suspend my disbelief for going on between the two of them. Again, I know I'm being cryptic, but that would be a big, big spoiler. So I'm trying to think if there's there are a lot of passages, but I'm trying to think if there's anything specific. I did want to talk about this passage here. And this is from the perspective again of one of the surgeons, Dr. Goodsir. Goodsir nodded slowly. He had been so reconciled to the certainty of his own death in the coming days or weeks that even the thought of potential salvation was almost painful. He resisted the urge to allow his hopes to rise again. And I just felt like that was very relatable, even in terms of our own lives, even if we're not stranded in the frozen Arctic and, facing impending death. But the idea of being afraid to get your hopes up because you've been hurt or let down so many times before. And these men endured unimaginable conditions. They, you know, I've learned a lot about the Arctic and about sweating under your layers and then the freezing and then the melting and the just the misery that would be there. Their feet are like constantly wet, and that's just some of the things. I mean, there's like big, big, heavy things that you think about, like amputations with little to no anesthesia, really not even any anesthesia, more of like drugging someone. And then eventually they run out of that. So you have that kind of stuff going on. But then there's also the other things that I didn't really think about, like when they have the longer periods where the sun is out longer, even though it's still very cold, because they've been used to temperatures like below freezing. If it gets above freezing, they start to get hot. And sometimes they would want to even take off like their shirts completely. And the men are getting sunburned, and so they're miserable because they're getting sunburned. They have to rig up certain like wire mesh glasses or something, because I don't know why they didn't have their other glasses, or if they had some, I don't know. I got to look up sunglasses and all that. But they had to wear, they had to just make these wire mesh covers for their eyes to try to keep from going snowblind. And then they couldn't really see when they had those on, so they didn't want to wear them. And when they didn't wear them, they would get bad headaches. It was just miserable, just absolutely miserable to think about these, you know, men stranded and stuck on this ice for 3 years or so. And this vlog, I know, has been very, very long. So I am not going to talk in this vlog about what I find out when I research the actual Franklin expedition, because I don't want this vlog to go past an hour. And I'm going to go now. And I don't even think I I didn't even tell you what I was going to rate this. I am going between 4 and 5 stars. 5 for the research that was done, the way that I cared about so many of these characters, the beautiful way that Dan Simmons wrote about not only the natural world, but character building and about characters' emotions and about their experiences. I cried a few times reading this. Um, it was just really stunning writing as far as that goes. The descriptions, like I said, that made me want to go and find out more about history and science and survival in the Arctic. The only thing that's making me hesitant on the 5 is that stuff I mentioned at the end with this connection that happens in a certain way. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about, the communication that is able to take place between the indigenous woman and one of the crew members. I don't know. But I think I'm going to go with 4.5, rounded up to 5 on Goodreads. So this is the end of my talking about the terror, but I am going to put at the end here some footage of the snow tomorrow so that you can see me embracing and getting excited about winter weather that we don't often get. So thank you for watching and stay tuned for snow. If you like this, then please hit that like button, subscribe. Let me know down below if you've read The Terror and what other Arctic recommendations you have for my next video. I'll be reading Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. I'm also going to start watching the Terror series on AMC. My husband will watch that with me. He's not going to read this big, thick 766-page book, but he'll watch the series with me. So I'll also let you know what I think about the series in the next episode or video for this series, where I'll talk about Dark Matter and the Terror series. So you'll see me in snow soon. Gandalf. Gandalf, you don't like the snow? If you're a little braver, hey, it happened. We're getting it. So thank you. Thank you so much for watching this Polar Gothic vlog and ending it here on a perfect note with snow in South Alabama. See you in the next video. Bye.